Can the AFC North have three playoff teams? The answer was originally looking pretty good. After all four of these teams had a winning record at the trade deadline. But Lord and behold, instead of getting a, normal football season from this division, we got injury after injury after injury to these starting quarterbacks. And now, Lamar Jackson, the one quarterback who everybody ripped on for not being healthy, is the only healthy quarterback in this division. Great job, media. You did a great job. It turns out pocket passers can get injured too. Huzzah! Well, yeah, that was kind of expected. I guess no team from this division is allowed to actually emerge healthy. I figured all the talk about this division beating up on itself was overblown, but good God. So yeah, the AFC North, I know Cleveland has 8 wins, but come on, everybody sees the writing on the wall. Because Baltimore, you are division champions. Or at least most likely. And I don't think this is where it stops there. Baltimore has had a great season so far, and it's only going to get better. These are the top teams in the AFC at the time of making this video. And taking a look at Baltimore's schedule, I think they can get the number 1 seed. These Ravens are going to soar, baby. They are going to soar high and hopefully win more than one playoff game, because apparently there's a cap on the amount of postseason wins Lamar can get every couple of years. But enough about that. Let's take a look at these games. You got at Jacksonville, at San Francisco, home versus Miami, and home versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jacksonville has been having some issues as of late. We don't know how great Trevor Lawrence, is going to be against that Baltimore defense. That's on the road. San Francisco's tough. The Dolphins are, maybe they may be a little bit of frauds after losing the Titans, but the jury's still out. And a divisional game against flailing Pittsburgh. The more I look at this schedule, the more I think Baltimore's going to go 3-1 down the stretch here. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, man, why on earth would you have them lose to Miami? Well, because San Francisco playing on Monday Night Football, I feel like coming off of that and a short week is going to be a little bit rough on them. But these are winnable games for this Baltimore team. I know that they just had some issues in overtime against the Rams, but they won. And they are in firm control of their own destiny here. There are only a couple ways that Baltimore doesn't get the 1 seed. One of which is that they absolutely choke, and the other is that these other teams self-destruct. Let's talk about the team that is the only one really in a position to catch Baltimore at this point. Because it's not Kansas City, it's not Jacksonville, it's the Dolphins. So the Dolphins, they got a brutal stretch of games. Yeah, they get the 5-8 New York Jets, but then they have the Cowboys at Baltimore, and then home versus the Buffalo Bills, who thumped them the last time they played. Realistically speaking, the Titans' loss really put into perspective the primary issue with the Miami Dolphins. And these are the teams that they beat. The Chargers, the Jets, the Patriots, the Giants, the Commanders, Raiders, Panthers, and Broncos. What do all these teams have in common? That's right, gang. They all have a losing record, except the Denver. But I'm gonna count Denver in on this. They stunk to start the year. You can't give up 70 points to still be considered a playoff team. Denver, dang it, Denver. But these teams that Miami beat, they combined to a 34-70 record, which, guess what, gang? That's a 2-loss to 1-win ratio. That's not great. That is not championship caliber. And in order for Miami to steal the 1 seed from Baltimore, they would need to go on a crazy, crazy run. Now, realistically, I do think there's a chance they can go 3-4 down the stretch, mainly because Baltimore is going to be probably reeling a little bit just because playing at San Francisco on Monday Night Football and then going to play Miami that's tough, especially when Baltimore will be coming home from California. There was a crazy stat a couple of years ago that every team that plays the San Francisco 49ers, they lose the week after. I don't think that's necessarily the case this year, but the point is there's going to be a lot of well, recovery time needed for the 49ers. Obviously, I think Dallas is going to beat the Dolphins mainly because Dallas is a good team, and I know it's in the Miami Sun, but the Cowboys are going to have a field day. And the Jets stink. They have Zach Wilson. They stink. But I know Buffalo thumped them last time, but these divisional games are usually close or closer. They get weird. They get weird sometimes. And the Buffalo Bills, they had fits in Miami the last time they played. Remember, that was the one where Ken Dorsey, who got fired as offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, had that complete meltdown because they lost. So I actually think Miami could go 3-1 down the stretch, but even if they get the tiebreaker to Baltimore, which, by the way, is not a guarantee. Baltimore's a really good team. And there's a chance that Miami could go 2-2, 1-3, God forbid, 0-4 down the stretch and collapse, but I don't think that's the most realistic outcome. My projection, most likely, for what it's worth, after all, I've actually had a really, really good track record. How good of a track record? Well, I predicted the Lions beating Kansas City. I had the record of nearly every AFC and NFC North team correct at the trade deadline. And even some of my wilder takes turned out to be true. I predicted the Buffalo Bills would start the season 5-3 and go trade for a running back. They didn't trade for a running back, but they did end up getting Leonard Fournette. I also predicted that the Bengals would start 0-2, go 3-3 into the bye week, and then come out and beat the Buffalo Bills and San Francisco, which that all happened to be true. I predicted the Baltimore Ravens would sweep the Bengals, which turned out to be true too. There's a lot of stuff that got right, including the Detroit Lions winning their Monday Night Football game and rising to, I believe, 6-2 at the time. And I also got the fact that the Denver Broncos were going to roll into Detroit with a 7-6 record, and Detroit would go into that game with a 9-5 record. I've actually had a really good track record compared to a lot of pundits. So, take what I have with a grain of salt, but this is what I think is the most likely outcome for this team. Now, with that being said, I don't believe in Kansas City. I actually think Kansas City could lose that Patriots game this upcoming week. I would not be surprised if that happened. There's some weird stuff going on in Kansas City. Again, that's another thing that I predicted correctly way back when. I figured Kansas City would have a little bit of a slip up or have some issues, mainly because their team and the way they won last year was very similar to the Golden State Warriors. Check out my channel and take a look at the short section. I think I did a pretty good job in that little YouTube shorts. But Kansas City, just like Golden State, combined a young core, old offensive, old Hall of Fame guys, and then beat a team in green from the East Coast with a rowdy, obnoxious fan base in a year they were not supposed to win. That was Kansas City last year. And on top of it, there were a bunch of similarities with Draymond Green and Travis Kelce. Both those guys started their own podcasts the year they won the championship, and then proceeded to punch their teammates in the face in the following offseason. Lo and behold, that is an incredible, incredible comparison. And it's turned out to be exactly true. So the crazy thing about the AFC playoff picture is that there is a complete bottleneck. Cleveland maybe 8-5, but I see a little bit of trouble down ahead. I actually don't think they're going to grumble to like an 11-12 win team. They're not catching Baltimore. What I do think is realistic is that they go 500 down the stretch, mainly beating up on Cincinnati and the New York Jets. That Houston game is tough. CJ Stroud has torn up every other defensive shreds, and it's in Houston, so Cleveland doesn't get the home field advantage. And Chicago's been playing good ball. I kind of figured that Chicago was going to go on a little bit of a run here, beating the Vikings, beating the Lions, and that's turned out to be true. Chicago's on a heater. If you take out that 0-4 start, Chicago's above 500 team. They just started really, really bad. The Bears this year are very much like the Detroit Lions were last year. Detroit last year, they started 1-6, they flipped the switch, and they started winning a bunch of games. And Chicago's been kind of that same deal ever since at 0-4 start and a few games with Tyson Bagent. They found a little bit of a groove. Their defense is playing to get better. And against Joe Flacco, there's a lot of weirdness with him, whether he's on the practice squad or starting. Oh, there's a lot of weird stuff going on in Cleveland. Cleveland is a phenomenal team. They're going to make the playoffs, but I feel like they're going to go 10-7, not 11-6 or 12-5. And I don't think they're going to completely fall off the wagon. They're too good. They are too good everywhere except the quarterback to not get into the playoffs at this point. On Pittsburgh and Cincinnati are inextricably linked. So while I know there are going to be two playoff teams, I feel like there's a chance that Pittsburgh and Cincinnati could cannibalize themselves. So let's look at Pittsburgh's schedule. Pittsburgh plays the Indianapolis Colts, Cincinnati Bengals, Seattle Seahawks, and then the Baltimore Ravens at the end of the year. Now, that Baltimore Ravens game at the end of the year could be a gimme depending on if Baltimore clinches the number 1 seed. If they don't, that's a brutal game. But the Colts are frisky. The Bengals have been okay with a backup. The Seattle, I don't know what to think of Seattle, but they may be playing for their lives. And the Colts have been good with Gardner Minshew. I think the most likely scenario here is that Pittsburgh goes 500 down the stretch. I know. That seems weird. Like maybe they beat the Bengals instead of the Seahawks, but I don't think Pittsburgh has the juice. Not with Trubisky. With no Kenny Pickett. The offense is still a little bit of a mess, even without Matt Canada. I know they got a bunch of yards one of the previous games, but I mean, Bill Belichick clowned you. You lost to the Cardinals and the Patriots. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a little bit of a mirage. I figured they'd finish around 10-7, which I feel like that's kind of where they're going to end up. But Cincinnati is going to be in a similar boat. And I think they're also going to go 500 down the stretch. A little bit of a different thing, though. I feel like beat Minnesota, beat Pittsburgh, and then just kind of fall off the wagon at the very end. And 9-8 is not good enough to make the AFC playoffs. It's not. Bengals, Steelers, Broncos, Colts, Texans, Buffalo Bills, they are all 7-6. All 6 of those teams. And if that wasn't enough, these 4 teams are all 5-8. Meaning that 9-8, that's not going to do you diddly squat. You're going to need 10, 11 wins, which, when I made my wild predictions back in August, so like filling out my own bracket and picking out my own teams, I had every AFC team that I picked at 11 wins because there is no room for error in this conference. I think Cleveland is safe to get in the playoffs, but the 2 teams that I actually think are going to get in instead of the AFC, any of the AFC North teams, I think it's the Buffalo Bills and the Houston Texans, mainly for different reasons. Look at Houston's schedule: Tennessee Titans twice, Indianapolis Colts, and the Cleveland Browns. Now, we don't know when C.J. Stroud's going to get back with a head injury, or if he's good to go, or if I think they're going to probably split with the Titans, and I feel like they can win that Cleveland game, win that Colts game. Those are all winnable games. And the Buffalo Bills play Los Angeles Chargers, New England Patriots. Those teams stink. Those should be wins, unless you are Pittsburgh and you decide to lose to two teams with 10 losses. But hey, who's keeping track of that? And then they got the Dallas Cowboys and Miami. I mean, if Buffalo splits Dallas and Miami, both of these teams could find themselves at 10-7, which I don't think is crazy. Dallas, is going to Southern team in a dome, out in the cold, out in the elements. Things could get weird. Buffalo has a little bit of momentum after that win in Kansas City coming off the bye week. And if they lose in Dallas, you really think do you really think Miami is unbeatable? I'll tell you what. This is a real pet peeve of mine. Quit talking about the Broncos. Quit talking about the Broncos. The Broncos are not going to make the playoffs. Mark my word. You keep stock of this video. The Broncos are not going to make the playoffs. They're just not going to do it. You know why they're not going to make the playoffs? Because this team is average. Average. Sean Payton made this team from trash to maybe average. They started off too rough, and they're going to go 500 down the stretch. Two of their final games of the year are divisional games. I know Justin Herbert is out. But the Raiders are trying to figure some stuff out with their interim coach. Detroit is not a gimme. That is not a gimme. Detroit has responded with every single one of their losses with a win. I think the Broncos may win that game, but that's not a guarantee. And the Patriots are really trying not to tank. If they were going to tank, they would have lost that Thursday Night Football game. They can't tank. They can't tank for Caleb. The tank is over. The Broncos are going to miss the playoffs. This means that these are going to be your three playoff teams, and with the way the tiebreakers are, Buffalo, even though they're 10-17, would end up as a 7 seed, and Houston would have the tiebreaker overall. So, in all honesty, this is the likeliest outcome, not just because of the schedule remaining, but because the NFL, they love storylines. And if there's one thing that makes this league easy to predict, it's because it's the NFL wanting to make sure that they have stories to talk about. Miami being the 2 seed and Buffalo being a 7 seed, that would be great to talk about. A third-class divisional matchup. Josh Allen versus Tyreek Hill and Tua. That would be a star-studded game that would get a bunch of ratings. Jacksonville and Houston, that would be a divisional game, and you'd have CJ Stroud versus Trevor Lawrence, a true clash of a guy who was the number 1 overall pick of his draft class versus someone who should have been a number 1 overall pick in his draft class. In Kansas City and the Cleveland Browns, well, 3 years ago when Baker Mayfield was the quarterback, that was the exact same game that helped get him kicked out of Cleveland. So after all this quarterback carousel, getting rid of Baker Mayfield and getting Deshaun Watson, they find themselves without Deshaun Watson back at the exact same spot they were with Baker Mayfield. This would be poetry. This would be exactly what the NFL would love to have. And so if you do believe the NFL is rigged, I think this is a series of games that they'd love to talk about. Anyways, guys, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching State of the North.